All right, hey everyone. My name's Alex. I'm the current president of the TGDA. COVID's been a pretty harsh beast, and we all have to stay safe and adhere to new rules, which has made board gaming pretty awkward and difficult to do in person these days. But on the plus side, it does give you time to push your creativity and yourself a little bit further, which is why we wanted to do a digital Devcon. It's been in the works for a few years, and with the crisis, it was a good way to push us to actually get it to come to fruition. So traditionally, in the last 6 years, we've run Devcon. Devcon has been hosted just before PAX on the Thursday. So PAX goes Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And the benefit is because we're in Australia, and Australia is gigantic, we all come together at PAX Oz, and we have that opportunity to actually see each other in person and network and see each other's creations, play tests, and we do our educational talks. So as with this digital Devcon, we have the benefit of using international guests who don't come to Australia every year. As special as we are, they just can't afford it. I'm sure they might one day, but when they do, we'd be happy to have them at the physical Devcon. So we have 3 special guests. Each one gets to do their own talk. If you have any questions, just make sure you write down what your questions are, and we'll ask them all at the end of the 3 talks. So we'll just stick them in the chat, and and if you want to designate the question to a person, just make sure you write for Sam and then have your question. And after that, we'll have a little bit of a wrap up from Soap about TGDA. And after that, if you want to join the Discord channel, we can all do a playtest on anyone's games. Just organize it through Discord. So just have a bit of a free chat there. I'll put the link in the chat for you guys, and the links on the TGDA page as well. Devcon Digital couldn't happen if we didn't have all you guys wanting to see the content and buying all the tickets, which is fantastic. I just wanted to also thank my admin team, because they are, as usual, very helpful and generous with their time, because we do all this for free. And we wouldn't have anything to show you if it wasn't for these 3 generous guests. We have James Wilson from the prestigious Everdell. He's up, I don't know where he is on your screens, but he's up there for me. And that way. And then we have Sam Macdonald, the co-designer of West Kingdom's trilogy. And we have Eduardo Baraf, I hope I said that properly, down there for me, from Gaming with Edo and lots of other stuff. And I guess we'll start with James. Would you like to do your talk first?
Sure, no problem. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, no one answered, so I'll take that as a yes. That makes it a little awkward and weird, I guess. Hi, everyone. I'm James Wilson. I'm the designer of Everdell and all of its expansions and other games that you'll learn about in time. Thank you for joining me for the digital convention here. I hope you guys have been able to get in some gaming, maybe some designing during this time. I was kind of trying to think about what to talk about. I'm kind of the new kid on the block, really, as far as designing goes, and Everdell being my first published game. But something that's that I keep coming back to as I'm working on more and more designs is finding out how to find inspiration. And I get a lot of inspiration from other games. And so I kind of just wanted to dive into that a little bit and talk about my experience. And I'll use Everdell sort of as an example, but just some things that I found have worked for me and ways to kind of help you get out of a rut. Because if you are in the process of designing games and you have not gotten into a rut yet, you will. It's just going to happen. So hopefully this will kind of give you some ideas to keep you going. I'm going to take you back to June of the year 2012. My wife and I had been into gaming for about 3 years at that time, ever since we bought Carcassonne and realized that this is a pretty awesome hobby. And we got hooked like a lot of people do. At that time, we had 3 games that we were really into a lot. It was 7 Wonders, Race for the Galaxy, and Agricola. And it's weird because those games they're still out there, but they're just not on the hotness as much anymore. But at that time, those games were a big deal. Now, ever since we'd played Carcassonne 3 years prior to this specific time, I'd kind of been thinking about designing games. I scratched out some ideas that were just kind of some terrible terrible first tries, but I couldn't stop my brain from just going back to it and trying again. There was something about it that was just magical and appealing. This idea you could take cardboard and paper and actually make something. So this kind of all leads me to the genesis of what would eventually become Everdell, but Everdell had a really long road before it became published. So one evening after we were done playing a game of Agricola, probably like our 40th or 50th time, I told my wife that I had a thought, an idea. It was just kind of this what if spark of a moment, a game that was kind of like Agricola, where you had a limited amount of workers and you had to gather some important resources and that sort of things. But instead of focusing on pastures and stables and all that, what if it was basically just cards, like Race for the Galaxy, which was our other favorite game. So you can already see here the inspiration coming. So I kind of took these two pieces and mechanics and thought, what if we smash them together? At that time, there wasn't a game like that that I knew of that I could find. There's a lot of games that are similar to that nowadays. But at that time, there wasn't as much. So I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and try to make it. Which kind of leads me to my first point is, in my experience, the best inspiration, it's like a wildflower. You need to let it grow. You need to water it. You need to give it something to work with. See, I wasn't like racking my brain trying to think, boy, it'd be awesome to make a board game. Wouldn't that be great? More like all of a sudden I thought, what if there was a game that was like this? And that only happened because I was playing a lot of games and I was playing them often and letting them soak in. I think as a game designer, it's really important that you play a game more than one time, because as game designers, we spend a lot of time trying to put depth into games, and that depth typically can't be found with just one play. And so if you're trying to play games to get inspiration, you need to play them a lot, because then you will start to see the layers and you'll peel them off and you'll discover the intricacies and the things that are underneath there. There can be benefit, I think, to playing a lot of a variety of games, but I think it shouldn't be ignored to play a one game a lot and really see what makes it tick. And the other thing that was a really important part of this was that little phrase, what if? That question is really your secret weapon as a designer or an artist or an inventor. And I think that mindset is something that you need to have, and that you need to become curious and you need to have this childlike sense of wonder. What if something was done this way within a game? And if you're not using that term what if as a game designer, then you're missing something. So I would just encourage you that every single time that you play a game, remember that all of the rules that are written for that game in that rule book is simply the designer's opinion of the best way to use those components. That's what they think you should do with those pieces and how you should manipulate them. Your job as a game designer is to come up with a different opinion of how to use mechanics and pieces and rules and bits and cards. And that happens when you ask that question, what if? What if cards were face down instead of face up? What if this game all of a sudden had a hand size limit? What would that do to the game? What if I was able to roll 3 dice and pick one of them instead of only one? What happens? What if? And these type of questions can lead to some cool little changes for games you already have, or it can just be enough to just foster a complete new idea for a total new game. That's what I had. I had a what if question. What if you had workers that gathered resources and you used those resources to play a tableau of cards in front of yourself? It sounds incredibly simple, but that was all I needed, and that's what got me going. So the next morning, I made a single card on my computer, and I called it a farm. It cost 2 wood, 1 clay, it was worth 1 point, and it gave you 1 food each turn. This sounds incredibly exciting and original, right? Not at all. But the weird thing about it is that card has basically not changed from that time, way back in 2012 until now, whenever that was published. It's essentially the exact same thing. But I had no idea how that card would work within the game. I had no idea how you would get the resources or purchase it or buy it or any of those other features at all. It was just letting the idea of inspiration propel me forward and drive me forward and asking that what if question. Which kind of leads me to my second point. Don't be too quick to build fences. So what I mean by that is you should allow your design to have space to tell you where it wants to go. In my experience, if you sit down and you put some hard restrictions around what you think this game should be, you may miss what it actually wants to be. That could be something really cool and exciting that you just had no idea what it would be before. So be okay with wandering around in your design time and in your space, and continue to ask that what if question. What if all of a sudden we could go this direction that I've had closed off all of this time? What if I just break that rule and let's just try it? Let's see where it can go. And you may discover some really great things, or you may wander for a while and it may seem like it didn't really get you anywhere, but that's you exploring and learning what this game can become. With Everdell, I spent many blissful first weeks just designing cards. One idea led to another idea, and I just let it go. I didn't have any fences on what the game was going to be. I just explored it. And probably at this point, all of this talk makes the design process sound like really messy and really wild and undisciplined. And for me, in my experience, it can be at times. It can just be a wild mess. But I think that that's what can really lead it to something that can become special. So my final point then is restrictions are your most powerful tool. So use them carefully, but make sure that you do use them. So broken down to their most basic concept, games are little more than goals with restrictions. Your goal is to capture your opponent's king. You can only move one piece at a time. There's a limited amount of spaces that you can move onto. Each of your pieces has a unique restriction to how they can move, and your opponent gets to take a turn after you take a turn. So imagine if chess did not have some of those restrictions. What if you can move two pieces on your turn? What if you got an extra turn every time you capture somebody else's piece? You can see how there could be potential cool, exciting things that could happen there, or the game could just fall to pieces. So at some point in your design, you have to build those fences that I warned you about on point number 2. Eventually, you will have to build them. But before you do, go and explore the whole land and explore the whole territory. Then get ready to build those restrictions. Once again, become a student of other designs and let yourself draw inspiration. So be inspired by the restrictions that you find in other games. Some of those restrictions can be so simple, but they can be the most powerful aspect to make that game into a game and not just an experience that we're just playing with pieces on the table. And it can force you to make those decisions. Everdell has some really important restrictions that were not immediately apparent to me when I started the design. Like in the early days, people were allowed to play as many cards as they wished to. There was no restriction on that. So you could have a tableau of 20 or 30 cards, really. It was wild mess. And eventually I discovered that a restriction actually makes the game more fun and it makes it more interesting. Because as soon as you restrict how many you're allowed to play, there's a value that's placed on a card that I don't have to write on the card for you. It just becomes intuitive to the game as you go, and you understand that you're filling it up. And that restriction took a long time to find exactly what that had to be, that it had to be 15 cards. And it oscillated all over from 20 cards to 10 cards to 12, just all over the place until that balance was really finally found and that restriction had to be placed on there, which made the game better. Designing games is, for me, it's kind of this cerebral, unique joy. It can be extremely challenging. It can be a really long journey, but I have found that continuing to seek out inspiration from other games really kind of helps me pull myself out of those potential pitfalls. And it also can let me just see what else can be out there. So that would be my encouragement to you. Don't get yourself stuck only in your cave, only with your design. And also don't get yourself stuck just playing games one time in a big wide group of them. Really dig in, really dive deep. And when you get stuck on something, find your answer in other games. See what they can offer you and see what ideas that they can give you. And if you do your job well enough, then the next great designer will probably be inspired by your design. And that will be a really great feeling. So keep it up. Thanks.
Thanks, James. That was awesome. That actually gives me like a very deep understanding of Everdell, and I can really see that you explored all the bits and pieces with it, because having played Everdell quite a lot, like just the amount of cards and restricting your tableau to 15 and being able to do so many things with only 3 workers is just crazy. But thanks a lot. That was fantastic. Ido, would you like to do your talk next?
Sure. So in thinking about what to talk about this evening, I went back and forth a little bit in terms of subject matter, but certainly if you're curious about anything I might have an opinion on with Gaming with Edo on the industry Q&As and general topics, I've covered a landslide of content. But what I thought I probably would talk about tonight and maybe have a sort of unique perspective from the rest of the panel is I've obviously, if you're not familiar, I run Pencil First Games, which is a hobby board game publisher that has published 10 or 12 games, some of which I was the designer on, some of which I partnered as a developer with designers on to release, but in particular has gone through the Kickstarter route, right? And so what I thought I would talk about a little bit is that idea in that moment as a designer, when you're thinking about your game and going through the process of creating it and being inspired and all the different parts of making. When you get to that moment where you're like, all right, I have a design. What am I going to do with it, right? Am I going to just tuck it under my bed and say I've designed a game and I can enjoy it for myself, but it's not for anyone else in the world? Or am I going to go to protospiels, or am I going to pitch it to publishers, or just try to go the Kickstarter route, right? And today there is a wide range and spectrum of opportunities for designers to get their games to market. You get better at it as you go, but there's always some process. And just as much as there's the story about what inspired you to create a game, there must also be the story of how the design went from the design to Everdale, right? And so one of the things that I like to say to people in sort of a sideways way is sort of, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I think it's really important when you're making games and you're designing, right? You're inspired, whether it's by a game or working with different people or a piece of art or mechanic or whatever, is this, what do you want from it? Is it you enjoy the sense of exploration, creativity, problem solving? Like, what is inspiring? What are you feeling? What is hooking your heart, to say it in a different way? And then how much does that attach to a sense of wanting other people to play it? Accolades, like some people really want to show off how good they are at designing. Some people feel like it's a route to have a job, right? Like they want to actually make it a career. It's really where their passion wants to lie. But that's not true for everybody. And so as a designer, aspiring designer, active designer, I think thinking through what in your heart of hearts you feel is the best outcome for you, I think is a big part of that. And I think people skip that step when they get in a rush and they get building and making. And I think it's important. And so, but as you work through that process, as you figure out what you want, right, then you do have these opportunities, right? And so, if you really enjoy the act of designing, but you're not really good finding people to work with, finding an artist, finding all the, getting the game together, you really just have your pen and paper prototype and you've figured out this mechanic and then you're sort of there. That's probably the point where you're somebody who's going to reach out and find support. And that could be support from communities on Facebook or otherwise, online, in person, at conventions, protospiels, where you meet the folks in your community and learn and start discussing and playing your game with other aspiring designers or active designers or publishers or just friends. And then through that process, maybe find the folks that want to work with you and like bring it to life. Or also then finding a publisher. There's different ways you can bring it to life. There's that organic work with people bring to life. And then there's the hand it over the fence to a publisher bring to life, right? And so that happens in a couple ways. You can meet somebody at a protospiel, as I said. You can pitch online. You can just cold submit, right? And ultimately, you can submit to a contest and hope to win and then get recognition, right? All of that is sort of taking this thing that you've started, and in essence, you're saying, I started it, I don't really have the skill set or the interest, then they're very different things in handing it over to somebody else. I'm okay with this idea that I'm going to give it away and you might own it in the end of the day. You might have royalties, right? But you're gonna take that baby of yours and you're gonna put it over there and let other people run with it, right? And that's something that can be difficult, but also something that if you recognize you don't have a skill set, you recognize you need support, you recognize, you have a full-time job, you don't have the time, you just have this great idea, you want to see it come to life. That can be a really great decision for a lot of folks to sort of hand it off. And I think that if in any way that seems like the right choice or the path, it's really, oftentimes the easiest, maybe not the lucrative, maybe not the most control, but if you can find somebody that's willing and interested to grow your idea, that's very powerful. For me, one of the interesting things is I consider myself a generalist, right? Like I'm not the world's best designer. And so for me, I find when making something, partnering with people who are specialists, who are better than me at some element or aspect of what we're trying to do, is valuable, right? So it's sort of like you might compare yourself to the other designers, right? But you don't typically, depending on the person, compare yourself to an artist, right? Like a designer, some designers are also illustrators and also graphic designers and that kind of thing. But your typical designer isn't like an illustrator as well. And so you're not saying like, well, I could do the art. And you're probably not also a publisher. Like I could figure out how to work with China and get this manufactured. So there's like things that are naturally easy in your head to like separate out from your skill set. And then you've got those weird overlapping things that are a little bit close. But so pitching to publishers, I think that's a great route for a lot of people. Protospiel is in person, working with other folks who are local and have experience with that, I think is fantastic. But like, let's say that's you don't fall into that category. You fall into the category of either wanting to own and really control the entire design execution of what your vision is, right? Like, so you can be a game designer, mechanics designer, but you can also be a product and vision holder. Like, it's not like, I don't want to just make mechanically this game. I want it to be like this. I really want it to be a grand scale sci-fi adventure with art that looks like this and written by these authors that I like, and I want to find those folks and pull them together. And if I could never hand this design off and find out that it's like My Little Pony kids game, right? Like there's no way I could ever let it not be what I want it to be. And if you start falling into that category of like wanting control, ownership, or just having a really strong vision, then I think, thinking about the Kickstarter route is not unreasonable, or more and more a route where you pull together a team of folks to really finalize and functionally make a game and then find a publisher, which is a little different than just handing over a prototype, right? So if you're in that category, I think Kickstarter is an incredible and powerful tool and method to bring your products to life. You just need to then understand that you're stepping into this additional level and world of work, of skill sets, and just be ready and willing to take it on. You have, you as the designer, you as the product manager, you as the social media expert, you as the marketing marketer, you as the, caller, the barker, you as the person who is dealing with customer service, you as the person who's dealing with manufacturing and payment, and then you as the person that's figuring out distribution. And so there's a lot of process, and there's all sorts of videos and write-ups and folks that can help and support you in doing that. But I think back to that question of what do you want to be when you grow up, I think you should filter in that, like, what gives you satisfaction in life, what gives you joy, what gives you all those levels of like, why is this something you do? And I think by understanding that, it will help you figure out the correct answer there. And I really like people to focus back on like what they want as people, as an individual, because I think that will unlock the answers to a lot of these questions. It's really easy just to let the treadmill or the product or the flow unlock the answers, like force you into those things. Oh, like he suggested I should do this, so I want to do it. And then you find yourself in a position where it's like, well, but I didn't really want that. So, I mean, it's sort of long-winded, right? And I suspect some people have questions and comments about different things. We'll get to that at the end. But I do think driving back to what brings you satisfaction and joy, and what are you good at, and what do you want to be doing, and what don't you want to be doing, is a big part of figuring out what route to take your design.
Sorry, I wasn't ready to unmute there.
But
It was a bit of abrupt. That's fantastic. And from someone that has done so many Kickstarter projects and your own games and game design, it's very valuable advice. Just a quick question for Ido. Just one from me.
Sure.
What do you think your biggest strength is when it comes to designing board games? Because you have done everything from like graphic design through to production and publication and distribution.
Yeah. Well, so what I would say that I'm, so professionally, I'm a producer or product manager, and I make video games. But setting that aside, over my career, what I've become really good and strong at is working with folks who are specialists or know what they're good at, and helping them work together. And alongside that, having a really strong and clear product vision that then gets translated through. So like a good example of that would be Skull Hollow. Skull Hollow is a game that from the aesthetic, like I'm a big fan of mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics, which is a sort of game structure MDA. But with Skull Hollow, I knew exactly the game that I wanted, much like James did. And I didn't have the answers James had either, where I was like, I want a game with a bunch of little things fighting a giant thing, and I want them jumping on, and I want it to be fun and visceral, and I don't want it to have dice, and I don't want it to feel like a miniatures game. I want it to be something you can just play head to head, like Confrontation, Lord of the Rings game in 30 minutes, right? But I'm like, boy, I'm not really good at asymmetric design, and I don't, I'm making some cards, and this is not coming together the way, like, it's nothing I'm doing is meeting what I want it to be. And at that point, and some games, the Siblings Trouble, there's other games I'm really happy with where I was a designer. But in this case, it was like, I need somebody better than me to help own the design of this, the mechanics, the feel, and then through working with them, get to where I want it to be. In that case, that was Keith Mateka, who's flipping amazing. But then it was marrying Keith with the artist, Dustin, and the meeples and the production. So for me, it's about knowing when and where I should be doing something, and knowing when and where I'm like, no, I think somebody else should do this, and I'm going to help propel them with what they're doing. So for me, it's a little bit of a mixture, but I've worked with lots of people who have different distributions of superpowers, right?
Yeah, fair enough. And that's definitely a good answer. Sam, would you like to tell us about the flaws in your own games?
Yeah, that's a bit rude, isn't it? No, that's the name of my talk. I'm talking about the flaws in my own games. So, hey everyone, thanks Alex and TGDA for inviting me along here. It's a privilege. I'm from New Zealand, if you're wondering about this funny accent. It's a little bit like Australian, but not the same. So, I am the co-designer of the West Kingdom trilogy, so Architects, Paladins, and Viscounts, alongside my buddy Shem Phillips. We were in a band together, and he's been designing games for 11 years or so. And one day I had this idea for a game mechanism around investing a whole bunch of workers into a location, and the more workers you've got there, the stronger the action becomes, and coupling that with this idea that other players could arrest and capture your workers and then send them off to prison. And I showed Shem, just asking for some advice about how to make this game more fun, just to play with my friends. And he decided that we should work on it together and that he was going to publish it. So that was my first game. That was Architects of the West Kingdom. And I've been loving this hobby of board game design ever since. So talking about the flaws in my games, you've probably got this big long list if you've played any of them, and that's all good. But what I'm specifically speaking about are these features or mechanisms in games that I really, really like, but that are inherently flawed. And this talk is inspired by a guy called Alex Jaffe from Riot Games. He gave a talk which you can find on YouTube called Cursed Problems in Game Design. And he's talking about video game design, but a lot of this applies to board game design as well. And so what he's talking about are these rough features, these flawed and problematic aspects that are a part of otherwise brilliant mechanisms in games. So these are sort of like the beauty spots, if you will, that prevent the game reaching perfection, but that you can grow to love. So we could call them unsolvable problems, where we end up having this balancing act where we have to compromise for them. So I'm going to try and explain a little bit more clearly what I'm talking about, use an example like Architects of the West Kingdom. So the feature in Architects that I want to talk about is the variable game length. So how Architects work is it's a worker placement game where players are effectively using their workers to gather a bunch of resources. Then later on, they're going to spend these resources to build buildings. And buildings is the main way that you're going to score points in the game. And everyone wants points, right? So to build a building, you are placing a worker in a guild hall, which is a location on the board. And this is effectively going to fill up over the course of the game and act as the game timer. So the more buildings that the group collectively are building, the closer we get to the game end until someone builds the final building and the game end is triggered. And so if people are building small buildings that require few resources, then naturally the game could be a lot faster than if they were building big buildings that require a lot of resources. There are lots of other games that have this feature about variable game length. To name a few, Terraforming Mars, Scythe, Great Western Trail, Maracaibo, they all have this. And why I think this is a cool feature is that it gives players this opportunity to assess the board, to assess the game state and see how long do I have left in this game. They have to constantly be assessing, and they might have to adapt their plans based off, whoa, I don't think I've got enough time to finish what I want to do. I need to change my plans. And it also gives players a bit of control. They can put the pressure on other players saying, hey, buddy, you're running out of time there. You're not going to be able to finish what you want to do. And so to use Architects again as an example, when we were playtesting, there came this point in each game that we played, about 2/3 through the game, where we all shuffled a little bit forward, on the edge of our seat, holding the worker in our hand, waiting for our next turn, looking at the board, seeing all these things that we must do before the game ends. You've got a whole bunch of workers in prison. You want to get them out so that you're not going to be penalized. You've got all these debt cards that are worth -2 points at the end of the game. You want to pay them off to make sure you're not in debt at the end of the game. You're on the virtue track and you want to make sure that you're going to be found virtuous at the end of the game because everyone wants to impress the king, right? And then you've got this big pile of resources and these building cards that you've been planning all along to build and to score points off them. And there ends up being this kind of push your luck thing, because you know that if you build this building now, then other players might think, whoa, I could end the game. And so you might delay and stall and hope to do everything else you wanted to do and then build your buildings. But sometimes that can backfire. And so we had some amazing end games where you're so stressed just wanting to do all of these things. And sometimes it paid off, sometimes it didn't. But the inherent flaw in this mechanism is that it makes the game harder to balance. And what can happen is, instead of it being different each time, which is a possibility, you could have a fast game, you could have a short game and a long game. What can happen is that if you're always playing with the same people around the same table, what's called a meta can develop. So the same people end up playing the same way each time, roughly. And so the group meta could be that we build the cathedral, which is a really easy thing to build, requires not that many resources, and it makes the game faster. And so a meta can develop when people are playing Architects that everyone just rushes up the cathedral and they end up with these really, really quick games. And you lose some of that excitement and that push your luck aspect that we had when playtesting. And then we have apprentices of the game, which are engine building, right? And they're giving you ongoing benefits throughout the course of the game. If the game's going to be shorter every time people play it, these lose their value and they're no longer as strong. But if people are playing a long game, they become really, really strong. So that's a flaw that's really, really hard to balance. Players having a meta in their game group and it getting stale. So it's a really cool feature, the variable game time, but it's flawed. We tried to address it a little bit in our expansion where we give all these new ways of engine building for players so that they'd want to play a slightly longer game, but they still have a bit of control and a bit of pressure to apply on other players with the game timer. So I'll talk about another game now and another inherent flaw in my design. And that is Circadian's First Light, which is a big dice placement in space kind of game. And the feature that I want to talk about is variable player powers. And firstly, why I think that they're good, why I think they're great. I love getting this special power that is only mine. And I love it when other players look across to my player board and they say, what, you can do that? That's broken. Wow, I want to be able to do that. But then you end up saying the same thing about their power. And that's fun. The other thing that's fun is in setup, you're thinking, oh, I might try this guy this time, or I might try this lady this time and try out all these different powers. And that adds another layer of excitement before the game has even begun. And then when you're packing the game away, you're thinking about, oh, next time I want to use this character. And so when you're packing the game away, you're almost ready just to play again and pick up a different character and try do a different strategy. So this is great. I love this mechanism. But again, it's inherently flawed because what you're doing when you design variable player powers most of the time is you're telling a player, hey, see this path over here? This is the best way for you to gain victory points. This is the most effective thing for you to do. If you do this thing, you're going to get all the shiny stuff, or you're going to break all these rules, and other players won't be able to do that. So with variable player powers, often we are limiting agency from players. So they have kind of less effective decisions to make. And it's almost like the designer is making those decisions for them. So that is an inherent flaw. Well, what are some ways that we can go about making a compromise to balance for this flaw? One of the ways is making the powers very kind of general and not specific. So if we are to use Pandemic as an example, there's one character called the Generalist. Now the Generalist, she gets one extra action point per round compared to the other characters. And she can use this for whatever she likes. So she can go down any path. But in thinking about the Generalist, I realized that that's probably one of my least favorite characters. It's not as exciting. So maybe this flaw of limiting agency from players isn't actually too problematic after all. Maybe players want to be limited a little bit. Another way that you can sort of address the flaw is you can give a lot of variable player powers in the box so that there are more and more for players to try. So there's just a lot of paths to explore. And one thing I did with Circadian's First Light was on BGG, I wrote up this little rules variant called the Dyad Alliance. And basically what players can do is they can pick two of the player powers and combine them and play a shorter game. And then there are all of these new permutations for people to discover, all of these different ways of finding synergies, of maybe going mainly down this path, but a little bit down this path. So figuring out what are the combos they can pull off with those two player powers. So variable player powers, it's definitely a cool feature, but it's inherently flawed. And so my encouragement to you with that mechanism to think about ways you can find a good compromise of keeping player agency, but also keeping that fun of the asymmetry. And how are we going for time? We got time for one more?
You got time, go for it.
Sweet, sweet. So the final game that I'm going to talk about is Paladins of the West Kingdom, co-designed with Shem. And the feature that I want to talk about is, it's a hard one to explain, but the pursuit of mastery. And so what I want to talk about with that is where players play the game and maybe they don't do so well, but they want to get better. They want to improve. They want to discover all of these layers that James was talking about. And this is, I think, is a fundamental human being, like, kind of desire for us, is to improve, to attain mastery in a specific field. And if you can put this in your board game where players, after playing it, think, I want to improve, I want to get better and better and better at this game, and when they can pull that off, that is immensely satisfying. That's an amazing thing to have in your game, where players can get better, they want to get better, and they feel rewarded when they do. But it is inherently flawed, because what happens is the more that players could possibly improve at a game, you're basically saying that the worse they're going to be in their first game, most likely. And so what happens is that the most experienced player has an advantage, and that the most experienced player, especially if they've got a lot more experience at this game, and this happens in Paladin, it's a flaw of Paladins, is that the most experienced player will often win. And sometimes it's even as bad as the new players don't really even have a chance at beating that experienced player. So that's really problematic, because we want everyone to feel like they should have a chance when playing the game. But we also love this feeling of improvement and love this feeling of attaining mastery in the game. So what are you going to do? That's just attached to the feature that flaw is. So the way that some games have gone about addressing this issue is chess. I'll use chess as an example. Chess basically says, after you play the game, we'll give you a rating, and then you should just swim in the pool with people at your level, basically. And that works for chess because it's got a massive player base. But that's a terrible solution for us, right? Only play with people around your level. That's a bad solution. Other ways that we can deal with this is adding interaction to the game, like a lot of interaction to the game, where players can basically pick on the leader or pick on the best player at the table. So games like Root or Risk or Cosmic Encounter do this, where players have a degree of control over the game balance itself by the decisions they make. They can team up, they can work together, they can pick on somebody. This is otherwise known as kingmaking. And I don't actually think it's all bad. I think it can be quite effective in some scenarios. And then the other way we could deal with this problem is increase the randomness, right? And the closer that we get to snakes and ladders, the less that experience matters in terms of who's going to win the game, right? So obviously we don't want to get to snakes and ladders. I'm sorry if you love that game, because there's no agency whatsoever. But the closer that we get there, the more randomness that we add, the less that your experience in the game is going to matter, right? And so with Paladins, we wanted to find this compromise where players could pursue and attain mastery, keep getting better and better and better, but where other players who didn't know the game still had a chance. And so there is a degree of interaction, there is a degree of randomness in the card draws and things like that. And so it is still flawed, but we ended up with this balancing act, this compromise that we are happy with. And so with Paladins, I'm actually designing an expansion almost in a selfish way for myself, because I've played this game so many times now. I'm not a master of it, but I'm getting closer to mastery, right? And so this expansion is to kind of confuse me again, to kind of get me excited again about this game. So I have to learn it afresh, figure out all this stuff for the second time. So yeah, I want to encourage you to try and find the balance and the compromise in these inherently flawed features of games. I don't think you should get rid of them. I think they can be amazing things like beauty spots. And so my question to you is, can you think of any other kind of cursed problems, any other inherently flawed features that are great, but are also problematic? Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Sam. All right, I got some questions for you guys. Just a quick one from Sam. Can we grab the name of that talk again that you mentioned at the start?
Yeah, okay. It's by Alex Jaffe, Jaffe, and it's Cursed Problems in Game Design. Cursed Problems in Game Design.
I'll just write that down as well. Awesome. That was a quick one. For James, it sounds like the what if, this is from Sean, it sounds like the what if thing worked well for you with the mechanics. Have you ever done it with themes to see where the themes lead?
So that was kind of Everdell in a way, honestly, because Everdell was not originally this specific theme that it is. It was more of a general medieval type of theme. And the developer I worked with my publisher gave me that exact thing. What if this was forest critters? And that was it. Like, that was all that he gave me. And I said, that's a really good idea. let's do it. But it's not just gonna be forest critters. It's gonna be a world. Like, we need to make a whole world out of it, not just paste in, a fox. We need to build a world. And so, yeah. And actually, on another design that I have coming out recently, I did the same thing. That one was 2 what ifs. It was a what if about a mechanic, and it was a what if about a theme, and then they went together. And so, yeah, that's the question that just always drives me every single time that I finish a game is, what if we did it this way? What would that look like? All the time. And that's how you fill up notebooks with ideas. At least that's how I do. A lot of them don't go anywhere, but it gets your mind practicing thinking. So, yeah.
Awesome. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, now's the time to stick them in the chat. This one's for Edo. This is from Stuart. Is it a common thing, because you work with lots of people, is it a common thing that those who are good at coming up with ideas and early designs actually suck at publishing?
No, I don't think it's a common thing or an uncommon thing. I think it depends. Typically, what I find generally with people is that the more somebody is really good at something, like the more they're like really good mechanics designer, really good artist, or just the more like they've worked on, spent their 10,000, 100,000 hours on task type 1, generally speaking, means they're not usually as good at the other types. And then you find people who are just amazing at all of them, right? Like there's always just the superhumans, right? But what I find more often, and which is why I sort of hit on this a lot in what I was talking about, is people who have a hard time understanding or being not introverted, but introspective, and thinking about and understanding actually what they're really good at and actually what they're not really good at. I see a lot of people who don't properly recognize their strengths and weaknesses.
They probably want to be good at certain things, but they're not. They're better at other things.
Right. And that doesn't, there's every opportunity to say, I really want to be good at this, so I'm going to work on it, right? But I think you run into lots of instances where individuals don't recognize that they might be a great designer and an okay graphic designer, but they're not as good as a great graphic designer. That maybe that's a point to hand off to a publisher to let them take that on, that kind of thing.
Fair enough. For Sam, Stuart has offered a solution for you. Would another solution be that one player's strength can be thwarted by another player when you're talking about variable player powers, I'm guessing?
Right, like a paper, scissors, rock type thing, where there's a paper variable player power that beats scissors, or beats rock, sorry.
Yeah,
that's one option.
Awesome. That was a quick answer. Here's one from Kim. How early do you map out the points of which a player can gain mastery and build in rubber banding, interactive solutions, or random solutions tuned into mastery opportunities during the design and development process? That was a very nice long question. Thanks, Kim.
Would you mind reading that again? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
How early do you map out the points of which players can gain mastery, and when do you build in rubber banding, interactive things, and random solutions?
Yeah, I don't know if I map them out per se. It's kind of, a lot of it is based on feel. So I'll often ask myself, and Shem and I ask these questions, was after a game, we'll say, 1, did we feel like we deserved to win? And that question helps us in balancing. Sometimes one of us will win the game and we say, oh, I don't feel like we deserve to win. And so that helps us to balance. Then the other thing is, did I feel like I did everything that I wanted to do? And 9 times out of 10, you want the answer to be no. Because if someone does everything that they planned out to do and then more, then they don't need to come back to the game. They get this feeling that they've sort of solved it, right? And so we need to make sure that there's that kind of that carrot hanging out in front of that player that's just constantly moving. They're getting closer and closer to the goal, but they've never fully attained it. Sorry that is kind of unsatisfying, but that's something we have to do in game design.
Yeah. I've got another question for Edo. Being in Australia, we are very, very separated from the rest of the world. So a lot of these questions, there's not a lot of publishers in Australia. So most of the Australian people have to go international to try and get to any publisher. So this question probably goes towards that. This is from Joel. What would you look for in a pitch from an international designer who is only able to contact you through email?
Well, it's a good question. I think I'll answer it for Pencil First Games, and then I can answer it for maybe more broadly. For me, I, generally speaking, don't solicit designs. I sort of solicit work in a couple ways. One, I get to know folks or a person, and then ultimately want to work with that individual, because I only get to make so many games in life, right? And I want to work with people I want to enjoy working with. So like, to some extent, building relationships and engaging with folks develops opportunities to work with them. And that's like an indie boutique answer. I'm sure like, USopoly doesn't, they're like, we're just keep it coming. But that's really important to me. So if I've never heard of you before and you just reach out to me, that's not a very enticing reach out. But the other thing for me is, again, because a lot of times I think of a market opportunity or product opportunity or a thing that I really want to bring to life. And then I'm like, well, what can I bring to the table? What am I missing? What's really useful for me is understanding designers, specifically designers, and what they're good at and their strengths, more than necessarily this design for how I go about making games with folks. So because it's usually around an idea already, as opposed to like, I'm going to take this design. And like, I just had this game design contest, and I'm playing through like 93 submissions, right? And so like, I'm playing all sorts of things. Like I love games, but
just saying.
Hey, but what designers never do, I mean, I think I've seen it once, is designers don't treat their work like a portfolio. So like, if you're an artist, artists typically aren't like, here's my art, can you use it and make a game around it, right? That's not what an artist does. An artist will typically say, hey, here's my portfolio, here's the type of art I do, the style, the look, the feel, here's a range of stuff. Do you want to work together? And I can do all this. And what I feel like I don't get enough from designers, or what I would recommend, especially when talking to publishers, is if you're going to submit a design, introduce yourself. I think it's very useful to include an outline of the games that you've made, an outline of the types of games you're good at, the types of games you enjoy, perspective on who you are as a designer. Because the more you make games, the more like designers are not the same and skill sets are not the same. And you just saying I'm a game designer X, it doesn't mean as much to me as me understanding what you've done. And even if you haven't made a bunch of games, none, nothing published, still, as a design, please see this is a 2-player dueling game. I focus on dueling games. I really love the dynamics, blah, 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 blah. That always says, oh, well, maybe I want this game, maybe I don't. But if I ever like, what about a dueling game? I'll think about that person. So I think that's an additive thing to do. With just other publishers, just look to their website. Usually publishers are really clear about what they want and what they don't like. I think Jamie Stegmaier at Stillmeyer Games is a really big, like, here's what it is. If it's not in this category, leave me alone. And I think publishers communicate that. A typical piece of advice would be like, look at companies' lines, right? If you're looking at, you want to have Blue Orange Games publish something for you, like, don't send them a Gloomhaven game. Like maybe, but like generally speaking, understand what their brand is, and that's who you might want to approach with your type of game.
Good. James, at what point did you pitch Everdell to a publisher, and what was that process like for you?
I pitched Everdell to a publisher after working on it for 3 years or 4, I can't recall. And I have to preface that by saying that I never started to design Everdell to get it published. I just started to design it because I wanted to make a game for my wife and I that I couldn't find on the market. And that was all that drove us to keep doing it. And then we kept changing it to make it more what we wanted it to be. And so at some point, when our friends would come over to play and they kept wanting to play our game, which was not Everdell at that time, City Builder or whatever it was called, something very lame. But we kept wanting to play that instead of other games. I thought, what will it hurt? Let's just give it a try. And the experience for me was pretty wild because I got a response the same day that I submitted it the first time. And that publisher looked at it and ultimately rejected it. Had good things to say about it, but then it happened again. It was seen by 3 or 4 publishers, and every single publisher responded the same day that I wrote to them. I don't want to get anyone's hopes up, but I'm just saying the board game industry is still small in comparison to other industries where you submit things like authors and that sort of thing. And you can have that personal sort of experience and stuff and talk with the publisher. And it's really cool. I think it's exciting. And that's kind of what Everdell happened to do for me. I was able to have that experience. So yeah, 3-4 years when I couldn't stop playing it and neither could everyone else, I guess I just said, well, let's just try it.
Fantastic. And it was such a good story because of what it became.
Yeah.
Just do a couple more. I've got a question from Spearson for Sam. What are some clear signs that your game is 100% ready or close enough for the final, for publishing or pitching?
I've got a really quick answer to that. If you're honest with yourself, how are you enjoying the game? Like, if you can be really, really honest and not biased, if you're loving the game and if you compare it to other games and say, not necessarily that it's better, but this holds up, then I think that's a good sign. Also, listening to what your playtesters are saying as well, right? Like, if they're, like what James was saying, if they're just wanting to keep playing this game compared to other games that are published, then that's probably a really good sign.
Just a quick one for James. Did you cold call the publisher, or had you met up with them in person at all, or any of the publication team for Starling Games?
No, just email. Just a cold email into their big pile of submissions. That's how it was with every publisher that looked at it.
Yeah, fair enough. And I'm assuming they get hundreds of designs from all over the world as well. So yeah, it's such a testament to how powerful Everdell was. For Edo, this will probably be the last one. Would you recommend that designers starting out would specialize in a certain type of game, or is it more appealing to a potential publisher to see someone who is mastering at a specific type of game? Is it more appealing to a potential publisher to see someone who's mastered a specific type of game, so for instance, dice or worker placement, or that they demonstrate a wide range of game designs?
It's a good question. I think that I'm going to sort of answer it in an opposite way, which is like, if you're a beginning designer, like, please design games that you want to make and that you're really passionate about and inspired to do, and drive your creativity and consistency and follow through to complete it, because it's going to be 3 to 5 years, right? Don't try to develop. I don't think. I might feel a little differently if you're trying to build a career in video games, but if you're just trying to make board games and be a designer in board games, I think majority of designers start that route, making games that they really want to make, that they're in love with, that they're passionate about, that inspires them to do and try and get to the convention and publish it and work through 7 rejection letters, etc. Then trying to develop a game designer skill set that then is marketable and to get a job. There are some cases where, a really great example, this just happened. Somebody wrote a nice review for Skull Hollow, and not even a review, like a BGG comment. It was just nicely written. Said thank you. Reached out to him and said thank you. And he's like, "Oh, I love the game. It's totally amazing." And we had been doing print and plays, and he took one of the print and plays for the new Mall Peak Hero, Guardian rather, and must have played it. And anyone could have done this. Like it wasn't special, but I mentioned that they were available, and he checked it out. And he sent back this report on his plays tests, where it was like, I've played it 20 times. Here was the scores. Here's what I thought. Boy, this ability's a little messed up. I would sort of do this thing. And it was like better than, I would say, 75% of the developers I've worked with in terms of its thoroughness, completeness, and complete understanding of the game. And I passed it along to Keith, and we were like, holy shit. And so, okay. And then we were sort of like, hey, there's another one. There's another Guardian. What do you think of this guy? And so he took it on and did it again. And I was like, talking to Keith, and we were just sort of like, we should hire this guy to do development on Mall Peak. Like he's doing way more than just something casual, and it's hugely good and beneficial. And so like he started doing that, and now he's, you know, sending reports, and we're paying him hourly for that, right, as a developer. And then like independently, he was like, I heard people asking for a solo mode in Skull Hollow, so like I thought I'd just make a solo mode Guardian. And like he made the cards, he made the deck, he made the playmat, he made the Guardian. And, you know, I mean, like that's the kind of thing where, you know, without going all those other routes, suddenly like, hey, this guy's going to be helping us out, and he's going to be a part of that product. And there's lots of examples. I did a Q&A with Paul Peterson, who's Guillotine, and that's my game. But like Paul Peterson made a ton of games. He was an active member of the Magic the Gathering WotC community forums, and started answering questions for people, to the point in which they're like, you're answering so many questions. Why didn't you just work for us? And then, wow, you really know these games. Can you help us? So, oh, you're going to design all these games for, like, so I think there's still ways to get involved that's not holistically, I need to design a game that somebody loves, but that's demonstrating your skill set and your ability in a way that's helpful and engaging to a publisher. So, I mean, that's an example that just happened. This guy's never done anything other than been a fan of the game and impressed us, right?
Could I jump in and ask a question to the other guys?
Yeah, go for it.
Could you give us, if you're happy to, a sneak peek into what you're working on at the moment? Just a little glimpse, a little taste.
Me as well, or just these two?
Yeah, Alex, you as well. I'd love to know.
Go for it, James.
I can. Boy, I'm not sure exactly how much I should say. So I can say mechanics, and that'll be safe. I had a what if question about card drafting, because I love card drafting, but I really liked your talk, Sam, about flaws, because that really spoke to me, because I see flaws all the time that I love, just like what you're saying. And a flaw that I have seen in card drafting, and maybe it's just me, is that I get a hand of cards, maybe there's 8 of them, and I want all of them, but I can only have one. So I take one and I just chuck the rest to you. And 2 things happen that bothered me. One is that I can't have them, and the other is that I don't really know what you're doing over there, and I can't do anything about it because I have to give you all of these cards. And so the what if card drafting was inverted? So what if I kept all my cards and only gave you one? That was the question. That was the what if, and that led to a game. That one will be announced really soon. It's a card drafting game. It's just card drafting. And it has a couple other things. It's a little bit lighter than Everdell, but yeah, it's me trying to just take card drafting and just completely flip it on its head, because I wanted it to be something different than it was. And it was kind of a weird, hard journey to figure out how to make it a game. But so that's something I have coming up that I'm excited about.
Money now.
Yeah. Well, it'll be soon.
Okay, awesome. What about you, Edo?
Oh, I've got lots of stuff. I'll have to appreciate the question because I'm launching a Kickstarter on Tuesday. So for those not aware, Kickstarter 2, it's the Whatnot cabinet. It's going to be a mess here. I'm going to try to do this really quick.
It's in 3 days for us.
Oh.
3 days for you guys.
Yeah.
This is the 4th game with Beth Sobel and Steve Finn and Keith Mateka doing solo mode. It's sort of the nature, casual, very relaxing game series that Pencil First Games have been popular for. So that's like immediately happening.
Hold it up again.
What?
Hold it up again.
Oh, sure.
All right.
Super pretty. It's a tile set collection game where you're making a grid with cool, cute, beautiful little objects, curios. But so that's like the immediate thing. But the 2 things I'm doing on, one is Malt Peak, which is the sequel to Skull Hollow, which we're super excited about. And the other one, which I think is less known, is I've been working on a game with Andy Ashcraft called Time Empire. It's been in development probably for 7 years, 8 years, something stupid, crazy long. And it's gone through 7,000 iterations, but I'm excited because we've actually gotten to that 90%. We're not going back point, and have moved into getting the graphic design and working on the look, feel, and illustration, and pulling that moving from just getting the core experience down and pulling it together. Probably still a year away from being done, but that one's been taking a lot of time and attention, and it's one super excited about. It's a time travel empire building game where you're going back and forth, thwarting people in time while trying to build an engine to create value. So it's
nice.
It's complex but cool.
What about you, Sam? You got something in the works?
Well, as a kid, I loved Risk, and I love Dudes on a Map games, but I think I love the idea of them more than I love them, if that makes sense. So I feel like I always have issues with them, with the games that are out there. And I think there are just amazing designers working on amazing games, but I always just have some issues with them. And so I'm trying to design a game that, it's going to have flaws after talking about my talk, but that I really want to play, that is similar to Risk, but, with a lot of modern Euro sensibilities as well. So it's a
West Kingdoms banner?
No, well, actually, after we do all 4 trilogies, I'm going to design the Vikings versus Franks versus Saracens versus Byzantines game with Shem. Well, that's the goal. So all the kingdoms will collide. No, this is Circadians, in the Circadians world. And so we've got these 3 or 4 different, we don't call them aliens, we call them the locals, these different races. And then the aliens are the humans, because we're the ones, invading them, or, joining them. So we've got humans and robots, and they're all kind of on this planet, fighting and negotiating and doing things together. So I'm excited about that, working on that with a friend who actually lives in Italy. So we have a 12-hour time difference between us, but that's been fun.
I tried to get someone from Italy to do a talk here with us, but it would have been about 4 o'clock in the morning when they were going to be talking, and they said, I'm not getting up that early.
Funny.
Yeah, cool. So I'm just going to unmute my friend Soap here, who's just going to do a bit of a TGDA wrap-up so we can all sit here and look pretty while she tells us stuff.
Yeah, no worries. You don't even have to look at my face because I don't have a camera.
That's right.
So first of all, huge thanks to all of our speakers today. It was absolutely excellent, guys. And also huge thanks to Alex and the team for actually making this happen and organizing this for everyone. And also huge thanks to everyone who came along and was here for the talks. So a bit of a summary of the TGDA stats that we had since our last Devcon, which was only 7 months ago when it happened around the PAX period. So we've currently maintained our Patreon supporter level. These funds are things that we use for this event, for the TGDA booth, the competitions that we run. If anyone here is not already a patron, please consider supporting us. I'm sure that Alex can chuck in as many links as necessary to the Patreon. Since in that time period, we've had an 11% growth to the Facebook group. We are now extremely close. I think we're about 4 members off 1,900 members. So that's been absolutely great. In that time, we've also had nearly 1,100 posts in that 7 months, which compared to the same time last year is about a 5% increase and just shy of 10,500 comments, which is actually down about 10% from last year. So we're a little less talkative. And of course, our most coveted biggest contributor badge goes this year to Sean Fenmore, Canberrans represent. So thanks, Sean. And yeah, thanks for everything, guys. I'll hand it back over to Alex to explain a bit about the play testing, because Devcon's not entirely over just yet.
That's true. And yes, thanks, Sean, for being the most contributory member of TGDA. I think you've held that position for about 4 years in a row or something like that. But yep, keep on talking. Soap is the newest member of our admin team. So thank you very much for doing that for us, Soap.
No, thank you for having me.
And I'd also like to thank 2 previous admin members, which is Wes and Kyrul, because they did a lot of work in TGDA. And as you guys probably don't know, a lot of this stuff is done behind closed doors. Like, no one gets to see the sort of work that we end up doing. And it does, you know, there's a lot of time dedicated to getting all this stuff out there. And Wes and Kyrul did a lot behind the scenes of TGDA and were very helpful. But, you know, their lives have become more busy and things have gotten in the way, and they had to sort of take a step back. And we've welcomed Soap in, and Soap has been helping out as well. But yeah, thanks everyone for coming. So I'm going to put a link in the chat for the Discord channel. And if you want, just jump in, join in. If anyone wants to play test a game online, organize it through the Discord. We've got these breakout rooms there. So if you want to just jump in a breakout room with people, organize it yourself. Let's get in there and have some fun. There's the links. Thank you so much to you guys. These talks were incredible, and just being able for me to do this, I've been wanting to do this for a couple of years, so this has just been fantastic. And if you guys are ever in Australia, make sure you come down and check out PAX Oz or Devcon in person just before PAX Oz, or just come to my house and have a beer. I'd be happy to have you. But yeah, thanks a lot for everyone that came and everyone that spoke. And yeah, this has been amazing. And I'm going to cut the meeting and hang up on everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.